I'm going to introduce our Associate Professor, Maya Soetoro, who will be moderating today's event. You can take it away.
Mahalo, Jose. I want to really thank you for shepherding, stewarding, helping to make these conversations happen. We are grateful to the Matsunaga Institute for creating this platform, and to all of you who take the time to actively participate, listen in, ask questions, and carry the thoughts and ideas that are shared into the community. In today's conversation, we'll examine ways to listen deeply and steward thoughtfully and make meaning of this particular moment in Hawaii. We'll consider our relationships to community, to land, and to peace. And we have a very special opportunity today. Kumu Ramsay is giving us the honor of premiering He Hawaii Au, I Am Hawaii, a film in which he is featured and his ideas shared. It's a lovely film, and Kumu Ramsay is of course here with us to share wisdom and stories after the film as well, to better understand Hawaii and the powerful lessons for the region and the world that come from here. Many of us have known of Kumu Ramsay Taum's work for a long time. If you're less familiar, let me just share a little bit from his bio. He's the founder and president of the Hawaii-based Life Enhancement Institute of the Pacific, cultural sustainability planner at PBR Hawaii and Associates, and he serves as the director and program coordinator on the Pacific Islands Leadership Institute at HPU. He was recently appointed executive director of the Hawaii Institute for Public Affairs, and his work in promoting sustainable place-based and Hawaiian cultural stewardship principles and practices is acknowledged locally, nationally, and internationally. Kumu Ramsay is a powerful cultural resource and sought after keynote speaker, lecturer, trainer, and facilitator, and we are very grateful that he is here to speak with our community today. Welcome, Kumu, and would you like to mention a little bit about this film before we get started?
Hi, mahalo, Maya. Thank you so much for having me, and to the team and for setting this up to share this really interesting opportunity, which was put together by some friends and students, colleagues who are actually in Italy. Dr. Emanuela Borgnino, who is a contact and a friend helping us with indigenous peoples' rights out of the United Nations. She came to Hawaii. We actually did some work together in Australia, and one thing led to another. And she felt it was important that the European community should learn and know something about what's going on in Hawaii, other than the traditional information. And so she asked me to if she could follow and learn some of the things we're doing and share it with their community. A lot of it having to do with sustainability, with identity, the relationships to places, and those kinds of things. So the content of this this documentary, which is again designed for a European audience, is really about that. It's less about me. I just happen to be the narrator that they're following around, but it's really intended to honor Hawaii, who we are as people, and our relationship to the rest of the community. And perhaps, as one of our kupunas said, to be that healing factor in a world that is going through some challenges right now. So that's what it's about. And thank you for allowing me to share that with you here today. We were going to do this as some film festivals in Europe this last fall, but because of COVID, we were unable to do that. And we do hope to take it to Europe eventually, but we're actually getting to see it for the first time here. So thank you for allowing us to debut it with you.
Well, we are very grateful as we sit on Kanaka Maoli land and are enjoying Hawaii and Hawaii's knowledge systems that have been shaped in a sustainable way. We get to applaud and offer some gratitude for Hawaii's many gifts and the chance that we have to learn from and enjoy her. So at this point, Jose, I think, is going to cue up the film and we get to enjoy this premiere. Please feel free to turn your cameras off and rejoin us at the conclusion of the film screening. Mahalo.
Was recognized as the state of the United States. I guess you could say my life since has been growing up with the state of Hawaii. We're kindred, we're brothers and sisters, which is really interesting, yeah? Because we say He Hawaiʻi, which means I am Hawaii. I belong to this place. So growing up here on Oahu, watching the city grow over time, it happened daily. So while some of us look back over time and go back to a place and say, wow, this place has changed, I was able to watch it change as I grew up. I remember how it changed just in that time. And I look back all those years later, 53 years, to see how much it's really changed. And not just physically, but culturally, spiritually, environmentally. Watching the sunrise, the color of the sunrise change, the values change. And while there are still some consistent values, I think the priorities have changed. While I think global values are global values, but Hawaiian or place-based values are those values that we give greater priority to because of where we are. And as others from other places came to Hawaii in the last 54 years, they came here, attracted here because of the values and the things that I hear. At least they say that. And the minute they came, they started changing them to look like the places they just came from. And I have to say that I don't think it's unique to Hawaii. I think that happens elsewhere, other places, you know. People come for one reason and then proceed to start changing it to be more like the place they just left, and then they start complaining about it. That always baffles me. The first time I really felt that and experienced that was with my grandmother, my paternal grandmother. She lived in Kailua. And it was a practice of hers to always walk to the beach, back to the kai, to touch the salt water, the nalu, the amniotic fluid of the plant. And so she'd walk back and forth to the beach, and that was her regular practice. So there came a time when she couldn't do it regularly. And then one day she went to the beach, and as she approached the beach on the path she'd always take, there was now a wall. It wasn't a very big wall, but it was a wall marking the property line. And so she proceeded to climb the wall and go to the ocean, which she had been doing for years. That was her life. And as she made her way back, she climbed the wall, and the owner of that property, not from here, comes out and begins to scream at her, "Get off my property. Get off my wall. You're trespassing." What? He changed that day. Changed. Hawaii changed it. My grandmother changed. Priorities, values. And it's not just her house. It's the forest. It's the ocean. It's our children's future. We can't keep taking without putting back. Hawaii, care for the air, the water, the spirit. Yeah. That's a lot. Yeah. And I think Pilahi, our kupuna, my grandmothers, they didn't try to be alone. They were alone. So I thank the kupuna and the elders, especially Auntie Pilahi Baki, who helped to reinstill within me that sense of belonging. You know, it's not easy. One of the greatest challenges for me is that people say, well, please share and teach us these things, but no one's willing to compensate for the time and the energy that it takes to do those kinds of things. You know, there's a tendency to think that aloha means free. Now, there is a concept within it that says to give freely, but allow me to give. Don't just come and take. Auntie Pilahi used to tell me, Mailani, embrace your stupidity. Because in your stupidity, you now have the opportunity to learn something. But if you think you're all that, you know everything, there's no way to learn it. And I believe her message to me and to the rest of the world was that we're all indigenous to someplace. And meaning not the political indigenous definition, but we're all places. We come from places. And as a result of that, those places are in us. And I like to say the common place that we're all from is Papahono, Earth. And when we look at Earth as an island surrounded by a sea of space, that means we're all islanders. Well, the Earth is experiencing turbulence, not just of its own making, but ours. So consequently, it's important, as Pilahi said, to start bringing healing in. My kuleana, therefore, is then to malama this place, to care for this, but not just the place, but these ideas and concepts. If you care for the air, the ha, and you care for the vai, the water, and the relationships that you have with them and the elements in the world around you, as well as those that share that space, human and otherwise, that's the E. When you care for the ha, the vai, and the E, wherever you are on this island called Earth, you're in Hawaii. Hawai'i, the air, the water, and the spirit. It's not just the name of this Kapai'aina, this island chain that you're here enjoying. It's a mission statement. It guides our behavior. And the spirit of that behavior is Allah. Not the word, the action, the behavior. And the spirit of Allah is within each of us. Therefore, it starts with us. Each and every one of us has an opportunity to breathe in the Ah, to reconnect to our places. Whether it's a forest or whether it's a city, wherever you are, that's where you start. We don't need people coming to Hawaii to start taking care of their places. Yeah, come, learn, But if you come, bring, don't just take. You come and you learn, that's fine. Teach, great. But go back. And when you go back, take care of your places. And if you're lost and you don't know where you are, then maybe we can help you find that place of belonging.
Mahalo, everyone. I am very sorry about the sound. The film actually has music as the images are presented in between Kumu Ramsay's words, but you couldn't hear the music. And there were a couple of places where Kumu Ramsay's voice was not as clear as it could have been. So apologies for that technological challenge. However, hopefully you were able to hear some of the stories and see, of course, the powerful and illustrative images of Hawaii that were shared in the film. It is a film that's very quiet, and in a way the images allow us without the good sound to layer in our own sound and texture, and to think about spirit and energy and advocacy as we work here in Hawaii, and thinking about the importance of Hawaiian cultural and spiritual practices and principles for the world, thinking about healing and forgiveness for resources that have been improperly used, or for respect that has not been conferred, the peace and the forgiveness and the healing that must, of course, now come. Kumu, would you share a few thoughts about the film? And
yeah. No, thank you, Maya. And I do apologize. I wish the sound was better, but I think what we'll do is we'll make the link available to those that have registered so they can see it on their own and listen in the comfort of their own spaces, because I think it does have some meaning when that all comes through. And of course, like much of our Hawaiian way, it's in metaphor. And I believe the team that put it together, they had done it and sent it to me. At first, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. But I saw what they were doing is that they were trying to follow the narrative and demonstrate, these connections of time. That funny sound we heard in the beginning was kind of like a heartbeat of the earth, going from natural time to artificial time. And that was part of what we discussed, was that we are in this tension between natural time, artificial time, natural space and artificial space. And part of it was really being able to convey to our cousins in Europe that what they may have heard about Hawaii as being part of a global community, that there is a different history to it. And that much like other places, the stories are important, primarily about the relationships. But Emanuela, or referred to as Manu, she was really concerned that a lot of people might miss the connection between spirit, or that in searching for one's own identity, that we begin to, I guess, appropriate other people's cultural practices to make our own. And in doing so, we actually become further distance from their own identities, which happens a lot. And I think as we've spoken over the years in my work, I find that a lot of people are longing for being, belonging, and that the belongings that we've acquired no longer satisfy our need to connect to something, our membership in the family communities that we're in. And so the intention behind their efforts to put this together was to begin to draw that, says, yes, let's come to this place, but let's find a way to connect to our own places, create the Hawai'i wherever you are. And that's simple or complex, but basically to care for the space, the air that we breathe, and the nutrients that we share mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, as well as the relationships that we have with our places and one another. And in doing so, then begin to operationalize and embrace really the values, principles, and concepts that makes Hawai'i that unique place that it is. And I think when everyone gets a chance to see it in the link, they'll begin to capture some of that. And because Emanuela was also part of the indigenous people's right movement, she felt it was important to contextualize the fact that Hawai'i is experiencing, or was, a nation, a kingdom that experienced globalization and overthrow. And she felt it was important to make that point. And I appreciated the fact that she was able to do that in this way. I find it interesting that we just celebrated the 129th anniversary of the overthrow just this past week, or this week. So it's quite timely. But that's kind of what it is. That was the first version. There's a second version that's being worked on since we've had some time now during COVID, that is really designed more for the European community, and ends a little bit differently by talking about our relationship to Mother Earth, the ocean, and the fact that she's coming home. It's kind of why I have the picture behind me now. The ocean is mother, and so it's about relating to that. So again, apologies that the sound may not have come across, but I hope that everyone will be able to experience it when we share the link with them.
Absolutely, and thank you for generously doing that, and we will make sure that everyone receives it, everyone who registered, and then you can hopefully experience it again and pay, kind of, it will resonate in a new way when you do. Anyway, we're grateful for the work, and yes, and it's one of the things that you share a lot is that we need to wash our eyes in a way. That's the word and phrase that I often use, but I feel that you're saying much the same thing, to renew our gaze, both about home and self, and move also away from this transactional mindset to one that is more relational and centered on the human and natural experiences of interconnectedness. And so many of those images pointed in that direction. And you in your work have fostered those kinds of interactions in many spaces and in the community that you build. So I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little more fully on this mindset shift that is needed, and whether or not you feel it is both possible and timely at this moment.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Maya. I definitely think it's possible. And as one person said it, why waste a good pandemic? We've gotten to the point where social distancing is causing the heart to grow fonder. right, of those that we cannot see or connect with. And this idea of reshaping our lenses, being able to see the world through different worldviews. And part of this exercise and the things that we work on today is really being able to be conscious of the fact that we have these intrinsic deep biases, and not saying one is better than the other, but we do come from different places. Our metaphors are different. Our expectations may be different. And so oftentimes we'll measure or evaluate or maybe even judge, misjudge, simply because our worldviews are different. And part of this was to examine the fact that communities like Hawaii that have experienced these disconnects continue to be disconnected as we, in part of the metaphor, but the base operating system of Earth, or Aina, an island, is experiencing the downloads of softwares from other places that are incompatible with the hardware. And then we wonder why the system is crashing around us, and we keep adjusting with new softwares, new patches and things, but none of them are compatible with the base operating system. And so maybe we need to go back to the reprogramming of this and begin to reconnect to those places for who and what they are, and not to make all places the same, but honor the fact that the diversity of our communities and our places is what makes living on this island Earth so valuable. And Hawaii happens to be one of those places where we have and maintain some of that natural ecological diversity, biodiversity, if you would. But we've welcomed people from many cultures and many places. And I remember a statement by President Kennedy in 1963 before he went to Dallas, where he actually acknowledged that in a conversation with mayors at the time about, and I'm going to paraphrase it there, he says, this island, this place is what I see our nation becoming one day. He was acknowledging that we managed to address the tensions, but by embracing one another to the point that we marry one another here. And so these kinds of examples that Hawaii has to offer shouldn't be lost because we are part of a globalized system that is experiencing its own tensions, whether it's through equity issues or whether it's through supply chain matters. When you're in the middle of the sea, you rely on the supply chain that we do now, whereas previously we didn't. So I think these are some of the thoughts that we'd like people to ponder and consider and rethink what are our assets rather than our liabilities. All too often people want to come and tell us what we've lost and what we no longer have, when I believe we, the people in the Pacific, especially those in Hawaii, have many assets that we can call upon. Our Hawaiian cultural values and the values and practices of many cultures that have made the local culture, the beef stew of Hawaii, as I say, really unique place. So I'm hoping that not only the message in the video, but the work that we continue to do will help people embrace that, not just that is Hawaii, but in themselves, and that they can find that sense of belonging. Because I think many of us are going through these cultural diasporas, right? And the fact that COVID and pandemics and the way we deal with that are beginning to really create these other separations that are requiring us to look for a much more internal compass rather than relying on externalities to guide us. So anyway, that's some of the view and thought that we try to convey when we're engaging our friends and associates.
Thank you. Most appreciated. I would love for you folks, by the way, if you are with us live on Facebook or here on this webinar, to feel free to add your questions. We'll get to as many of them as we can.
Yeah, please do.
Mm-hmm. And for now, I'd like to ask you to speak more about a lot of what you're talking about in terms of that finding and naming of the self, speaks to positive personal peace building, right? And just this idea of positive peace. And you've used the phrase makaliki eyes, right? But what do you think about how we can utilize kind of this new mindset and framework to have each of us take on the identity of a positive peace builder?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with how we define peace, right? And it's not, as you said, positive peace, rather than saying it's the absence of war or tension. Realizing that many of us may be experiencing peace, which allows us to go through our daily activities in the absence of conflict, which we can be much more creative in, etc. But I like to bring it back to the concept of communication, period, that war or violence is the lowest form of communication. In a peaceful environment, okay, we can elevate the way we communicate with one another, that I don't have to beat you or fight with you to convey a thought or an idea, which requires then that I develop that skill set, right? That ethos of being able to feel and think and convey my words. If I haven't done that, then maybe that's why we end up conveying the lowest form of communication. And what strikes me is that we are now living in a time when we have the highest forms of communication, even the fact that we communicate here across borders, across boundaries, across time. I mean, I have conversations in the morning with people in forward time. They're in their tomorrow while I'm in my today, which is there yesterday, right? We've compressed time. And yet we're using that high communication technology to execute the lowest form of communication on people elsewhere. That we can literally drop bombs on them, not know who they are, right? Simply because at some point in time, we were unable to convey our messages to one another for whatever reason. And that we're in a time when we have the greatest ability to communicate, and yet we find ourselves relying on the lowest form of communication. As a Lua practitioner and as an instructor and teacher of our Hawaiian battle art, it's one of the reasons we engage in that practice, not so that we can learn how to fight better, but so that we can learn to communicate better. One, we understand we can protect ourselves. The underlying principle is protection, not fighting. There may be a time we'll need to fight, but the overarching principle is always protect. For what? So that we can achieve the highest forms of communication, thriving in our lives rather than fighting and just surviving. And so these are some of the concepts and principles that I think that are embedded in, I think, in the values of this place, and any place that is connected to their particular spirituality, their resources, which is the definition I was offering earlier. The cultural values are really those that demonstrate our priorities. And I think it's not difficult to know what our priorities are as a community by looking around us. What have we built? What's the built environment look like? What does our trash and what do our landfills look like? People are asking me about production. We need to increase production. We're probably the most productive people there are. And just by looking at the landfill, we can tell you how productive we are, right? We have more waste than we've ever had before, which suggests we've produced a lot more to toss away. So what's the balanced approach to your point? How do we wash our eyes or lenses and shift not only makali'i, but this notion of makavalu, to see the world in multiple lenses, multiple views, multiple levels, and then embrace that through an internal space of peace and awareness. This is aloha, the reciprocity agreement of giving and receiving. Yeah. So long answer to a short question, but I hope that kind of helped to shape and frame it a little.
Thank you. Absolutely. And can I ask you to help us reconsider our approach to tourists and tourism at this point, as a meaningful part of that? Can you share ideas about, and some ideas have been put forth recently and have gained some traction and attention internationally, but maybe you can speak a little bit about how to contribute while visitors are here, how how they might leave us when they leave, what they might bring with them, how they might engage more fully. The key questions that might shape the experience of visitors, and what you think it will take to move us in the direction of really thoughtful, sustainable, respectful connection between worlds. And sort of also, what progress and changes have you seen already, and what hasn't changed enough?
Right. Well, oddly enough, it connects back to the last question about peace. I believe tourism or the visitor industry is a function of peace. I mean, people don't want to travel to war-torn areas, right? So in some respects, this exercise of creating destinations that we can share, learn about cultures, foods, music, art, all those kinds of things, that happens in a peaceful environment. So to a certain degree, guided by the right principles, this industry could be a strong force for peace. The real challenge is that when we go to other people's places, how do we treat those places as places where people are living and not just serving us as guests, right? And I think here in the visitor industry in Hawaii, something we've talked about for many years is that we are the host of this place. And yet oftentimes the hosts are treated like servants, thus the service industry. Well, oddly enough, the experience changes when I can be the host of my own home and welcome someone and say, how can I make your experience better for you? Because I'm a host, not a servant. And in shifting those roles and allowing me to share rather than you just coming and taking, we can build a better experience for everyone. So it shouldn't be strange to us that when we look at satisfaction surveys, that the visitor satisfaction goes down at the same time that the host satisfaction goes down. Why wouldn't that be a strange thing? If someone is not comfortable in their own home, how can they welcome you? Especially when they're living under stress of determining where their next meal is coming from or whether their children are going to go to school tomorrow. The very fact that we use different terms, you suggested tourism and then we use the word visitor, just that alone, that definition, the visitor is someone that engages, right? Whereas the tourist is kind of like a spectator. And it's not just here in Hawaii. I believe there's a love-hate relationship wherever you go to the tourist. Here they come, the tourists. This notion that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I think the enlightened and matured visitor is looking for experiences of engagement that actually gives back and not just takes. And maybe that's just hopeful thinking on my part. But I think we've seen this occurring where people who are more mature about traveling and they've been to places, they've seen the kishi things about our places. They don't need to see us climbing trees and spinning, fire knives anymore, as much as that might be a cultural practice that we've had, but it's inauthentic. They're looking for more real, authentic experiences. And I think a regenerative circular economy that is involving the visitor is one that leaves the place better than when they found it, that they can actually contribute to the growth of that place and not just take from it. And there are many programs that can be implemented that are carbon offsetting programs that help to plant forests and trees, restore the ecosystem while giving people good experiences. I find that those kinds of experiences are often best led by the people on the ground and not by visitors who are interpreting the place based on someone else's interpretation, right? There was a time someone could get off a plane here and within a day or two become a tour guide for somebody else that was on the plane with them. As ridiculous as that sounds, that was our experience here for a while. So imagine going to a place and actually asking questions and not just assuming that I'm reading someone's book that told me how to jump a fence or how to avoid the privacy signs, but actually engage the host who then invites you to that experience. And we've worked on programs like that where communities are saying, we would love to share what we have with you. Let us invite you to our place rather than just expect that because you have a free moment at 10 o'clock, that we're going to drop everything to show you how to plant taro, right? The authentic experience of taro farming is we will pull taro at 7, you be here at 7, you have a cultural experience, we're pulling taro, right? So I think it's how we reframe, define the experience so that it's a mutually beneficial one. and not just one that's economically driven, which is kind of our definition of our speaking, our gathering today. How does it become more relational and not just transactional? And I think that's part of it. The visitor wants to engage. We want to engage the visitor, but we like to do that on the terms that are beneficial to our communities, so that when they leave, and hopefully they do, and they can take something back meaningful with them, that we aren't left holding the bag, right? That we're not cleaning up after everyone simply because they didn't know how to clean up their rooms when they were children, whatever that might be. But I think this object, we teach people how to treat us. And I think as members of this community, we have an opportunity to do that, to share what it is to be a good host, which also means how to be a good visitor. But it does take patience, and it does take a lot more aloha, which is really difficult to find or do when we've been vilifying the visitor when they're coming in and not looking at our own behavior, So it's an enlightening experience. I think more as we become more mature and we become more enlightened about it, I think we can become better at that experience in industry.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And I think is a very balanced perspective, one that that sees both visitors and host in a beautiful mutual exchange. And I think that we have here in our audience a full spectrum of participants, students, educators, advocates, public service, and others. And I want to have you share with them some of your ideas about listening. And listening is, as I see it, really the key ingredient for proper and deeply respectful exchange and mutual understanding. And would you speak a little bit about your thoughts? What is the value of listening, and how do we do that here in Hawaii?
Yeah. Well, I think I always turn back to aloha as a guide. And that's not inappropriate, given that we in the state of Hawaii have a aloha spirit law, which is actually a guidance document. And in the terminology of aloha, Antipalahe Paki can set up these values that speaks to aloha and how we might exercise and operationalize those values. And in the middle of that word, aloha, she refers to the letter H as ha'aha, humility. And I think listening is a function of humility. It's also a function of respect, which is also aloha. And to listen deeply, to listen actively, is a sign of humility, a sign of ha'aha. Because what it says is that regardless of how brilliant I might be, I can allow others to have a moment in the sun on their own. And who knows, I might learn something as well. And that's what she was talking to me about. And that was a comment in the film, which was, she said, Mahelani, embrace your stupidity. Because in that stupidity, you've created room for opportunities to learn and for others to expand. Yeah, it's a law of expansion. So I think listening is a law of expansion. But I also will draw from the Queen and what she talks about aloha and about knowing what that is. And I'll paraphrase it, because she basically says, aloha is to see without looking, right? To feel without touching, and to hear without listening. It's a different concept. It's a sensing and not just a sense of touch. It's all touch, right? Physical touch, the sun touches our skin, the wind touches our skin, light touches our optic nerve. When you think about all the senses, something's touching something, and aloha happens to touch our hearts. And so it's a high touch experience living in a place like Hawaii. And really it's about getting in touch. And I think listening is one of the ways that gets us in touch with not only the person speaking to us, but if we allow their words, their concepts and thoughts, and maybe even their intentions reach us, then maybe we will expand as well. So perhaps looking at it as watering a flower, you know. Obviously, there are some things we don't want to hear. Sometimes it might be too truthful, the truth might hurt. And then sometimes there's just gibberish. But it's having the discernment, the patience to determine that, right? But in order to determine that, you have to listen and be less judgmental or maybe prejudicial in our approaches. And that requires aloha, right? It comes from a place that says, I'm going to be patient, ahonui, yeah? That I'm going to be kind, akaai, but I'm also going to look at ways of working together, lokai. But fundamentally, while there's olu olu, the one word in the middle that talks about being gracious, I think what Auntie Palahi was really talking about was oiai'o, this notion of being trustworthy and truthful. And so when you can listen to someone with that sense to build trust, I think we begin to address many of the challenges that we as a community and now as an island Earth are really experiencing the effects of distrust, whether it's leaders, whether it's companions, whether it's the news. What is it that we can trust? And so even in that, it comes back to listening to one's own internal heart, internal compass and guidance. And if we don't have that, then we're again relying on external sounds, yeah, the noise, if anything, to guide us through our challenges. So yeah, I think listening is an important sense that many of us could benefit from. As I say that, as I talk and talk and talk, so maybe I should stop.
No, you are not over talking. You're talking in measured, thoughtful ways. I want to ask you now just about this notion of stewardship, I guess. Our responsibility, especially to one another and to Aina and to Hawaii as our mother's house, as we emerge from this pandemic, you know, so the various kinds of stewardship of place, of nature, and of one another. You know, what are some small steps that we can take immediately to move towards more responsible, loving coexistence as we emerge specifically from the pandemic at this time?
Yeah. I think to really grasp the idea of stewardship, we really have to challenge our definitions or our expectations of ownership. Because so much of what we live in a culture of accounting and ownership, whereas stewardship is coming from a culture of accountability to one another and to our places. And I think both, however, are also rooted in something deeper, which is kinship, relationships, family. And if you don't have a sense of family or relationship, then stewardship really has very little meaning, right? You're not caring for anything for anyone else other than self. That's the selfishness of things, right? Which is begs the question, am I being self-centered or centered in self? And I think stewardship is one where you're centered in self well enough to recognize that my behaviors and actions impact others. And how I treat my places is also a way of how I treat others. That it's a respect, it's a reverence and not just a reference. We like to refer to things a lot, but if you don't have a relationship with it, there's no kinship to it, then there cannot be any reverence to it either. So I think stewardship gets down into that understanding that one, there will be tomorrow. I may not be here. And that whatever I do today, I do knowing that others will either benefit or suffer. And is there a connection? And as we say in our indigenous native mind, in this notion of 7 generations, we hear that a lot. But what does that really mean? When you try to operationalize that, for me, that's writing a letter to my great-grandchildren explaining why I did or didn't do what I did today, right? If I had to answer them every day and say, hey, Tutu man, what did you do? How come we got dirty water? How come the all boss up, right? If I'm not answering that question in advance, then I'm asleep at the switch. And so the stewardship mentality, which then lends itself to sustainability and thriving, says that if I'm enjoying the current condition, how do others, my descendants and the descendants of my neighbors, also get to enjoy that? You know, unless that's not a concern of mine, which for some that's not. And I think that's the distinction. Stewardship is one that extends beyond self. It requires us to really be connected to everything else, regardless of what I may be getting right now, you know. And that's hard when many of us have experienced a culture of me, but our culture principles come from a culture of we. And I think we're slowly trying to recover and bring us back into that culture of we. You know, and COVID kind of got us to that spot to a certain degree. We're in this together. If that's the case, then how do we begin to pull that through our policies, through our practices, but equally important, through our intentions? Yeah, I think we've tired of being intention. Now we just need to be intentional. And how do we get out of that particular space? So stewardship, I think, is a critical pathway to operationalize those other values we've already talked about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have run out of time for my portion. So I need to give space to the audience to ask questions. The first one I see here is, how do we apply ikavamua, ikavamahope, to remember the future?
No, that's great. Ikavamamua, ikavamahope. You know, one of the first things is to recognize that our olelo, our Hawaiian, is kind of counterintuitive. And so in the terminology, mua is actually before or forward for most people. Mua, let's move forward. Well, ihope moves back. But in this terminology, it's saying hope is the time before and mua the time after. Yeah, vice versa. And so it says, how do we pull from the future, which was over there, into the time after, which is the future? The time before, the past. The time after, the future. After what? Today. And so it's a difficult concept. It's not linear. It's more circular. Right? And the object is, what can we learn? How can we bring forward? Not just go back. How can we bring forward the best and best, the things that allowed our ancestors to live wherever they lived? And for those of us who live in the sea, we live in the ocean. Surprisingly or not, we're not on the ocean, we're in the ocean. How did our kupuna live in the ocean in the absence of ships, planes, and delivery systems that we've become so reliant on? How did they do that for so many years, so many centuries? What did they do? It came down to relationships, right? And I think that's part of it. We've now come back where almost every community is experiencing life as an island. You know, their resources come from other places. And so I think we've reached that point, come full circle, on the circle called Earth. Yeah, that we need to pay attention to that. Ikavamamu, ikavamahope. Our future is our past is our future. I don't know that I've seen it even better described or experienced. And I honor my friends, the navigators in particular, you know, Nainoa. When I think about him standing on the deck of Hokulea, looking into the heavens and keeping his eye on a star. In fact, any of us could do this tonight. But when you're looking at that star, which may be 1,000,000 light years away, we're looking into the past. In fact, that star might not even be there anymore. But in that act of looking in my present moment into the heavens, I'm looking into the past, which fundamentally means we're looking at our ancestors. We're looking at our kupuna. And in that moment, those kupuna are inspiring us to do what? Not just stand still in the present, but like Nainoa, using that star to navigate into the future. So the past and the future are connected because I'm in the center. I'm in the middle right now. Those two things is what connected me. Erase me from the equation, they become separate things. But the minute I acknowledge that the past and the present are connected in the moment that I recognize that, it's moment by moment. You know, Auntie Morna used to talk about that in Ho'oponopono, moment by moment, be present. You can worry about the past, you can worry about the future, but none of it makes any sense until you deal with it in the present. Ikawama kawama hope is about being present. Yeah? Acknowledging that we come from a place, that there is a history, and that if we intend to go to a new place, a future, what we do in the present is critical. Yeah. And so ikawama kawama hope. That's what I think it means. Yeah. To be present. To be present. Yeah.
Yeah. And our presence, all of us, you know, need to be present, I think, in order for us to make real progress toward peace, justice, and you mentioned Ho'oponopono. You're obviously not only a practitioner and leader and guide, but you know you do teach it in some places, and so we have a question here too that relate to Ho'oponopono. This idea, how do we get everyone to embrace the duty to make things right or righteous again in Ho'oponopono? And another related question is, after being in your Ho'oponopono classes for the last decade, what do you recommend as a best daily practice to keep us pono?
Good question. I think it kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of stewardship, relationships, responsibilities. It's not just about me, right? And I can recognize, and if my daily practice is to start out the day to do no harm, and then to end my day by asking for forgiveness for any I've done, hopefully I can clean the slate every day, right? To be able to say, please forgive me for what I've done to harm you, as I forgive you for the harms you've done to me. And then in that Ho'oponopono, that exchange, we can clear the slate and I can begin to start again. The intention is forgiveness. But understanding that forgiveness does not relinquish responsibility of those that do harm to making right. What it does do, it allows us to move forward and not carry the eha, the pain of that injury, right? That allows us to move forward. So Ho'oponopono is that, but because Ho'oponopono is not about fixing problems. Yeah, problems do end up getting resolved through Ho'oponopono, but that's because we're looking for a preferred condition. We're not here to fix the bad, but to create the better. That's what it means to make correct, to be appropriate and proper. That is the underlying term of pono. To consider fixing people, I don't know. I don't know that people are broken. We may have to heal people. We have to create healthy environments. Can we fix the environment? We can heal the environment. Maybe we need to fix our policies, fix our views, but I don't think we can fix people. We can provide healing experiences. And that's what Ho'oponopono is. So from a daily practice, I think it's acknowledging that we're all related, that the choices I make today, regardless of where they're influenced, and ask the question, why am I making these choices? What is it about me that allows me to see you and the world around me in such a way that I respond to it the way I do, that I get angry, that I get frightful, or that I get, distance? That's about me. That's not about the world. That's not to say that the world isn't challenging, but I'm seeing it in a way that the guy next to me is not. And so the daily practice is to ask ourselves those questions. What is it about me that allowed me to experience this person, this place, this time in such a way that I reacted the way I did? And until we do that, we are victims, really, to a certain degree of circumstance. And I think once we become enlightened and aware that I can, and the term in Hawaiian is no, the awareness to to allow that to rise up, to come to a level of consciousness so that I'm not just reacting to things, but I can say, hey, wait a minute, that just triggered me. That was an ouch. Well, how am I going to respond to this? And unless I have alternatives and methods, I'm always going to respond the way I was taught. So Ho'oponopono is about that. It's about creating these new conditions and new ways of finding preferred conditions, you know, and hopefully preferred means good, better than what was before. So again, it's can be deep, but at the same time, it's fairly simple. Yeah, it's respect. Yeah, and aloha.
And the wonderful Pahonu Coleman says, wow, I love all the Ho'oponopono should be taught at school, not rather than punishing students for their wrongdoings, right? And I, of course, have long believed that we should get rid of suspension and really bring these practices. And I want to ask you, you know, do you part of recognizing that people who engage in wrongdoing are often carrying trauma, sometimes intergenerational trauma, sometimes cultural trauma. Can you speak a little bit about your feelings regarding post-traumatic growth and how we can begin to address trauma? And we do have one of our attendees is speaking about a lot of generational trauma being manifest now, and there are daily and systemic abuses, and as well as abuses within ohana, you know. And so thank you, Jill. But if you can speak a little bit about trauma and your thoughts about how we can move from trauma to real growth and understanding.
Yeah, like anything else, I think the first thing is acknowledging that it's real, right? It's not imagined, that people are experiencing pain of some sort, emotional pain, physical pain. You know, the fact that two countries across the ocean have been fighting a war with one another for 2,000 years. You know, where does it come from? Some of us didn't experience the initial hit, the first bite. You know, we weren't there for that. But it's the memory of all of that. So to consider that trauma is a memory, and if we keep perpetuating the memory, well, we're actually continuing to perpetuate the trauma. In the skill of negotiation, for instance, or even healing, to deal with trauma is to replace it with something of equal or greater value. But if I try to provide somebody with something less valuable, that's actually a form of addiction, because we keep looking and hunting because I don't have enough. So that's my one way of doing it. But I would suggest one, we have to acknowledge that trauma is real. But then find out how that can move into the new space. What is the new space where trauma doesn't exist? Creating that space, what are the conditions that we need to live in or create where a person is absent of trauma? Right? Rather than how can I be just trauma-less? But if my decision screens, my criteria for making choices is driven by those traumas, then it won't matter if I change my environment, which many of us do, right? We'll change location, change job, change spouse, change name, change gender. We change something because we live in a time of change. But if our underlying algorithms of thought, behavior, and choices don't change, the trauma is going to continue, whether we're executing on other people or them on us. And so it comes back to stewardship, it comes back to relationship, it comes back to ha'a'a, it comes back to aloha, right? So there is room for it, but we have to acknowledge that it's real. Not hold people responsible for their trauma. Maybe hold people responsible for the behavior. That's different. As a Kupuna Samoan elder taught me, I might not like the behavior, but I love the child. Yeah. You change the behavior, you correct the behavior, but you always love the child. And in a system of punitive responses where we throw people in jail for misdemeanors or things like that, that's not a demonstration of that we love you, right? That said, there are people who need help that really have a difficult time structuring their relationships with others. But oddly enough, we've chosen a pattern that says you've demonstrated antisocial behavior. So our response is to throw you in solitary confinement where you have nobody else to interact with. And somehow that's supposed to correct your behavior, right? So we have a logic problem. And we also have a perception and reality problem when we call ourselves the land of the free. And yet in our judicial system, we have more people incarcerated than most countries put together. So there's a disconnect. And I think if we're going to deal with trauma, we're going to deal with any of these things, we need to get real about what it is we're saying and the way we behave and make those connections. That's where I think the deep split is. In our culture, we called it pu'uhonua, a place of refuge. It was a place of safety, not a prison. And unfortunately, the Western lexicon refers to our pu'uhonua as the place you went when you broke the law to evade punishment. That's not really what pu'uhonua was. Pu'uhonua was a place of ho'oponopono, where your behavior was adjusted. So if you broke into a house and you took the wood, then maybe the kahuna would say, now you go spend time with Uncle Wilfred and learn how to carve and make canoes. You know, if you break the car, maybe you need to go with Uncle Charlie and you learn how to build automobiles. It wasn't punishment, it was behavioral management, which is what ahupua'a is. Because what that does, it values the human condition and overrides the behavior. It says, yeah, poor behavior, something's wrong. How do we shift the ano? How do we get that person in alignment again? Because this kind of behavior is out of alignment. So that comes back to ho'oponopono. So trauma, I think, is a continuation of a misalignment. You know, that's not to say that, or to forgive those people who are bad actors. For whatever reason, they're acting badly. But those who are victims of that should not be held accountable for the bad actors, maybe for their own behavior. Now, I'll close with this. At some point in time, I think we may be able to forgive ignorance. I just didn't know. But when you're told and you're shown and now you just ignore it, that's different. You know, that's arrogance. And I think we move from ignorance to arrogance. And the way to address that is knowledge, enlightenment, demonstration, mana and aloha, show and not just tell. So trauma is a deep thing that's internalized. So I like to say it's an inside job. You know, we like to create the external places of comfort, but at the end of the day, it's an inside job. It's ethics, it's ethos. It's aspiring for something greater than the current condition allows. It's a lot of words.
Good words. Good words. Well, we have a couple more questions, so the timing might be perfect. Kainoa asks, how do we carry that center of place, such as the center of Hawaiʻi, even when we are not in the comfort of home? And how do you carry it with you and stay strong, even when, as a sojourner, you are facing a lot of discomfort and difference? I've been thinking a lot about, you know, the fact that so many of our keiki, so many of our young people are, when they go off to college, they come back very quickly, especially now, because they feel unsafe or unseen or misunderstood or misaligned, as to use your word. But can you share with us some strategies and tools that you have to carry it with you with strength?
Yeah, well, you know, that's what I was saying earlier about Lua. As a Lua practitioner, one of the fundamental measures, I think, is creating safe people, right? Places of safety. And as a practitioner, if I can feel safe, then hopefully those who are looking for safety will feel safe around me. And so the students and those haumana that participate in this, hopefully they become safe husbands, safe wives, safe partners, and they can create a safe place. And then If you have a safe home, then hopefully you can have a safe community. A safe community means a safe island. So for me, I think it's about creating places of safety, and that safety has to come from inside. Yeah, so mahalo, Kainoa, for that question, because I think what it also begins to touch on is what I said earlier about belonging. You know? If you have a sense of belonging that is not defined by your belongings, your material things, which we live in a world today that says, hey, I got a iPhone 12, the iPhone 200, you know, I'm now part of the group. When those belongings give us membership, what happens when we lose those belongings? We get lost again. And I think having a sense of belonging, knowing where you belong, knowing that you're loved, knowing that you have a culture, knowing that you have a space, knowing that you have an identity that is bigger than the name that's been given to you, right? Or the grade that you received in school. I think that's important. So I can say that I've been, you know, I get the opportunity to travel, to share wherever, and that might be internationally. And I can tell you, I've been to places I wasn't quite sure where I was, but I never had the sense of being lost. And I'm saying that because I knew where I belonged. I had a sense of belonging because I could turn to the mahina, the moon at night, and chant, and Grandmother Moon would give me comfort. Yeah. That sense of belonging is, I think, what allows us now to deal with challenging environments so that I don't have to worry about me and who I am at that moment. That I can then listen, as we talked about earlier, and engage those around me who may be in turmoil, who may be in trauma, so that it's not just about me, but about we. And I think it comes down to that. So I think when we can start giving our children, our communities, and our kupuna, because I think they're experiencing this as well, this sense of belonging and a sense of reverence, that as a human being, it doesn't matter what your grades are, you still deserve to eat. It doesn't matter how old you are, you still deserve a safe place to sleep. You know, Mamalahoe, Kamehameha said that you need to take care of our people on the side of the road. That law still exists on the books. You know, we need to honor the law. And I think the laws include the land, the air, and the water. Honor the laws. And so, Kaino, I think, you know, we've talked before, but I think it's that. When I have a relationship with my place, I understand the aina, the land I'm in, or someone else's aina. I can respect the air that's there and the water that we're drinking. Those laws and the laws of spirituality, honor those laws. And I think we begin to find ways of creating peace, yeah, rather than fighting over the land, fighting over the air, and fighting over the water. Yeah, I really believe that's what connects us. Yeah, is those things.
Mahalo.
I know. I hope that helps. Mahalo for the question.
I have a question now from Suzanne Varislam, who is the new head of the East-West Center, who offers her mahalos and asks you to, if you can speak to relational thinking as it relates to our brothers and sisters in Pacifica.
Yeah, well, that's a very timely question, General, considering that we just experienced the volcano and the tsunami in Tonga. If anything, it reminded us they were all connected, right? It happened in Tonga, but the water was overflowing in Waianae, yeah, and in San Francisco and in Alaska and other places. So the pond is much smaller than we think it is. And I'd like to think that the Pacific, if we reframe it, this is about economies of scale. The Pacific is a blue continent. And I say that because continental thinkers understand continents. They don't understand islands. And if Pacific Islanders are going to have parity at any time, then I think there needs to be parity in the way we're seen in terms of our resources. In the same way that it was at an ancient time, you entered someone's home, you always said, take me to your leaders, right? You always engaged and you realize that this is their place. I don't know that going to Fiji or Tonga or Tahiti is any different than me going to California, Nebraska or Ohio, just because it's smaller in size, landmass. But as far as resources, right? A small island is actually all the resources, which is the largest single body on the planet. So technically, from an economy of scale, we should pay much more attention to the Pacific than we have, not as a place to draw from or take from, but a place to nurture. And so I think that's part of it. I think it's acknowledging that our Pacific Island brothers and sisters may be the sages on the mountaintops that we've been looking for, right? Because every island is the top of a mountain. And when I was a kid, I was learning, oh, climb the mountain, talk to the sages. Well, maybe our kupuna on each of these islands are sages that understand how to live in an island. Therefore, the 21st century and beyond may rely on how well we bring that information forward. Yeah. Look at them as sources of assets, not as sources of resources that we can just take. But how do we engage them and make sure that they are left whole as well and not in one? Yeah. Aloha is about me leaving people whole. Unfortunately, we come from a culture that is extractive and we leave holes wherever we go. Even to the point now we're looking at leaving the earth and going to Mars because we've damaged this system so badly, right? Which speaks to the idea, changing environments doesn't change my behavior, which means I'm just going to do to that environment that I did to the last one. And I think if anyone knows, you know as well, that we've not only put trash on the aina and in the ocean, but we've now put it above us in space, right? Kuleana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's our kuleana? What's our stewardship? Mm-hmm. Air, land, sea, all connected. Air, land, sea. That's me. That's you. Take care of that, we take care of one another. Mm-hmm. So mahalo to our Pacific Islanders, but thank you for that question, General. Mahalo. Yeah. Look forward to meeting in person at some point.
Absolutely. So I have one more question here, but I think you may have just spoken to it or did earlier, but Amy asks, what is the most important value in life to you, and not that you're speaking for the entire Kanaka community, but what do you think is, other than aloha, perhaps?
I hope you always remind me of that, Maya, that I'm not speaking on behalf of those that have not elected me to. Yeah, I may be a Hawaiian, speaking as a Hawaiian, but I'm not speaking for all Hawaiians. I try not to make that mistake.
Yeah. So what do you think is the most important Hawaiian value to Hawaii at this time?
Well, there was an individual greater than I, who basically says, aloha ikekahi ikekahi. Yeah. Love one another. Fundamentally, I don't care what it is. I think it's love. It's the one value that once you establish it, and again, in all of its forms, not the romantic love, but the agape that we talk about. And I think agape is aloha. It is all that, but aloha not in a singularity, aloha in all of its forms, because we express aloha in different ways, through ha'aha'a, through ahonui, through all these. Aloha is all those things, because for each person, the individual, they're going to experience and relate to one another differently. But if they can walk away from that moment with a sense of belonging, a sense of respect, that you saw me, that you heard me, that I'm important in that moment, that comes from love. Even when we've been damaged and hurt, right? What helps us recover is love for self. Love ourselves well enough to know that regardless of what someone else did me, I'm still worthy of that. And I think fundamentally, love is the answer. Regardless of what particular characteristic or value we may find it in, it all comes back to that, right? And then to know that you are loved by something greater than oneself, and that you are more than just the sum of your parts. That's important. It's that sense of loneliness. I'm by myself. No man is an island. That's tough. And that's why I say the sense of belonging is really important to all of us, regardless of where we come from, what our status may be, what our ethnicity or our cultures may become from. At some point in time, it's a human condition, not a political one, not a cultural one, but a human one, right? And hopefully we will, as a group of people, mature enough to recognize that and not fall back on the mechanics, right? But on the meaning, yeah. And not look for mechanics to fix things, but look for deeper meaning that then shows us the way. So
No, that
thank
is
you for letting me meander in my mind with you out loud. Yeah.
well, we genuinely love your meanderings, and they do help us to make meaning and feel whole. So greatly appreciated. We have come to the end of our time together, but I wish to also express gratitude to Jose for making this work.
Yes, mahalo, Jose.
And thank you to all of you attendees. Please do follow, like, share the Matsunaga Institute on various platforms, and feel free to share the talk from today. And I love that you ended with this notion of aloha in its many forms. And love itself is so often oversimplified, and it is understood in monolithic or narrow ways, just like peace itself. So let us, as we go forward, really think about the very many facets of love, which are sometimes demanding and sometimes soft, but in the aggregate so powerful, and the many forms of peace. Thank you for helping us think through and diversify our understanding and shift the way that we see and feel. Beautiful to have this time together.
Mahalo, mahalo. I just say, e olo kono no ke kino a me kauhane, e malama pono ka manao, ke ola ke kino, I kamanawa pauloa. Aloha, aloha, aloha. Unify mind, body, spirit. Become one, be connected. Nurture that relationship throughout time, not just in the boxes that we stand here, but when we see one another, remember that we're all related. We all come from the same place, Mother Earth, We're all indigenous to some place. Mahalo, Maya. Always good. And feel free to connect me. Thanks to my daughter. I'm all over social media. I don't know how to work it, but thanks for her. She knows how to do it. So, mahalo nui, aloha, ahui ho, malama pono.
Ahui ho.
Thank you.